Holland Christian Medium Talk presents
Kids These Days!
Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Bryant Russ. I get to be the Director of Faith Formation here at Holland Christian Schools. And today we get to hear from a beloved HC community member, Dirk Hollebeek. Dirk served as the middle school principal from 2015 to 2017 when he received a life-changing diagnosis, as you'll hear in just a few minutes. In our conversation, Dirk explores themes of identity, hope, joy, and bearing the light of Christ on paths we never thought we'd be called to. Suffering takes so many forms in our school system and in our families, and though this conversation is uniquely Dirk's story shared from his own perspective, I hope his testimony encourages you towards a life of genuine discipleship wherever you may be. Thanks for joining us for Faith and Suffering with Dirk Hollebeek. Good morning, everybody. Hey, we're so fortunate to have our friend of the school, a friend of myself personally, Dirk Hollebeek, with us this morning.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
So, Dirk, we're going to have some student voices probably in the background as the school day is just about to begin.
Sounds good.
But
Yeah.
that's okay, because as we're talking this morning about faith and suffering specifically, I always like the sound of voices in the hallway as a reminder that we've got right now in the high school 600 and some different stories unfolding.
Yeah.
And so many of those, whether right now or later in their life, will experience significant suffering. And what does that mean for the life of faith? What does that mean for following Jesus? What does that mean for who God is and who we're called to be, with the reality that we all will suffer?
Yeah.
Dirk, would you just start by sharing a little bit of your story for those who are unfamiliar with it? And then we'll dive into some really important topics.
Thanks, Brian. And again, good morning. Good morning, all. And I agree with you. As a former educator, including being a principal at one point, there's always something magical about hearing students first come in the hallway. A school without kids is a really sad place.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, it was always a wonderful thing when you could hear the noise. Yes, I used to be, as I said, an administrator, and I was even on staff here at the middle school, as you might recall. That's where we first met. Yeah, and that all changed for me in January of 2018 when I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. And while I remained on staff for another year and a half or so, I never really went back. The cancer necessitated a bone marrow transplant, which I received in April of that year. And then, as can happen with any type of transplant, I developed something called a rejection disease known as graft versus host, which is somewhat interesting because generally it's the immune system that attacks the transplanted organ. But in my case, and in folks like me, the immune system was the transplanted organ. And so it attacks the body, specifically other organs. And that's what I've been dealing with since October of 2018, so almost 7 years.
And Dirk, what has that meant for daily life? The kind of the diagnosis you just described. Yeah. What has been the impact for 6 years of just normal everyday life with you and your family?
Well, as you know, we're recording this bright and early in the morning, and that was a challenge for me.
Sorry about that.
because you know what that's meant, and specifically, I've been diagnosed through biopsy of it in my skin, my liver, and my colon. But it's also made itself known in my mouth. It's made itself known in my eyes. It's made itself known really throughout my body. It has meant a lot of hospitalizations. It's meant a lot of surgeries. It's meant, I'm considered disabled by both the government as well as my insurance company because I can't do what I used to do. My body doesn't allow it due to the disease. Sometimes I walk with a cane. I didn't today, which is nice. That's a win. It's a nice way to start a day with a win. But I have balance issues. I have neuropathy. I have secondary cancers that I'm dealing with right now. including skin cancer, both inside and outside my body. So that's a pretty quick summary. It's a bit lengthier than that, but it has meant a complete change in my life. A lot of cancer survivors will describe life as being pre-cancer and post-cancer, and a beginning and not an end, but an after. And I would say the same thing, that for me, it definitely marked a very different life. And so that's really what we're talking about. I had disease before cancer. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 2. And so having chronic illness and disease and pain wasn't new to me. But having something this drastic that affected not just my day-to-day, but my family's day-to-day, as well as my vocation, was definitely a severe adjustment.
I'm just thinking in terms of identity. The things you just
let's
mentioned.
Let's go.
I mean, the things you just mentioned are how I think of who I am, right? My family, my vocation, all those things. And yet they're drastically altered.
Yeah.
What has that meant for how you understand, even like that, who you are?
Yeah, let's do that. And I would add on top of that, you've got to throw in, we're both married, we're both men. You've got to throw that identity in as well, because who am I? Because I'm not the provider that I once was. I am not the physical man of the house in terms of that traditional role anymore. My children, our children, Stacy and I have 3 children, including one who goes here. But you have to redefine who you are, and we're going to get into how what was helpful in doing that. But that means letting go of what you used to think a man was. And in my mind, I'm recalling all these chores that around the house, just daily life. And I would be able to direct, I would be able to find the tools, I would be able to tell, but I couldn't do any of it. And it's a serious blow to a male ego when your 10-year-old daughter is lifting the things for you, let alone your wife, let alone your teenage sons, and all you can do is watch. It could be crushing. It could be embittering. It could be just insurmountable unless your identity is tied into something other than what you can do. But that has to be forged.
I appreciate you saying that, Dirk, because sometimes we maybe oversimplify this in Christian communities and in the church, like, oh, your identity's in Christ.
Yeah.
But the word forged, I mean, that implies some kind of process and an ongoing understanding, and maybe even, I don't know, but a fighting for what does it mean today as I can't do X, Y, and Z. What does it mean that I am in Christ and that I am a son of the King, and all of those things?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for saying that too, Brian. Like that. When you mentioned that, I was thinking back to all the days that I have spent in bed, whether it be in our own home or in the hospital, and whether it due to an acute illness or chronic illness or condition, or whether it's just due to all the conditions at once, rendering fatigue being the only thing. And it would be so depressing because I felt this sense of time slipping away from me. And I still do, by the way. And I felt this sense of opportunity slipping away from me, and I'm spending another day in bed. And inevitably, that becomes a conversation with yourself of what's the value of this? Is there any value to this? I'm doing this alone, literally. In terms of physically, my family knows, but they're not here right now. And I'm doing this largely, it seems, unseen. And I use a term for those of us who know what chronic disease is, of lingering. The feeling that I had of I'm lingering. Lord, why are you allowing me to just linger here? And the idea being that those who are afflicted with some kind of disease or condition or whatever, those who don't survive it, we tend to see as almost like martyrs. Look at that. But they died in the faith, and they went all the way to the end, and they were faithful, and they're almost lauded, I think, aptly as a martyr. And then those who have an affliction and they're cured, and they come back and they have what I like to call a glory story. Oh, those are lovely, aren't they? They're fantastic, and they make us feel good, and they should. I would say those are almost saints. Look at that. They've got a story. Well, what about the folks who are in the middle? They didn't die, and they weren't restored the way everyone prayed for, including themselves, by the way. Probably more than anyone. And what does that mean? And what does that say about faith and life and being a Christian when what we ask for isn't delivered? That's what I mean by lingering, and that's the life that the Lord has called me to for the last 7 years.
Dirk, early on, when we were talking about this conversation, you said, I want to begin with defining two things up front.
Yeah.
You said hope and joy.
Yes.
Why do you want to start with hope and joy first of all?
Yeah, well, I think that allows us to live in that lingering stage.
Yeah.
And let's be more, I would like to be even more expansive. And frankly, we all, if we get real honest, are there. We know what it is to be in that in-between space. For some of us, it's just more obvious. Whether it be like mine, a health condition, it might be, frankly, a relationship issue. It might be the loss of a marriage. It might be the passing of a son or daughter, or the loss of a relationship with them. I mean, it's not exclusive, and I want to be very overt on that. Like, suffering is here. And suffering is in our present, or it will be in all of our futures. So the idea that we shy away from it is just mind-boggling to me. But we'll get into that in a minute. What is hope? And the working definition that has been really helpful for me has been the idea, the conviction or belief that the future will be or may be better than the present. That's hope. If you believe that, you have hope. Whether it's you laying in your room on your bed for the umpteenth day, or you're considering the future when it comes to an election, or you're applying to college. If you believe that the future is better than the present for some reason, you have some form of hope. Now, the second question is a little bit trickier, and that is, what is joy? And if you look up a lot of dictionaries, there's some kind of phrase that I believe is incorrect. So yes, I'm placing myself against the wordsmiths of the words and Webster. But it has something to say about an emotion, and that is some form of happiness. That's what joy is. And then it goes on. And I would completely contradict that. Joy is not an emotion. Joy instead is a connection to a hopeful entity outside yourself. That gives you a future and provides the room for hope. That's what joy is. Because joy can come in the middle of unhappy situations. If you feel that connection to something that is going to provide hope or a better future, and it's outside yourself, it's bigger than you, but you get to be a part of it, you have joy. And that's why it's so elusive, I think. When I'm the kind of patient who gets to know his caregivers, as any of my long-term nurses will tell you. So I remember I spent a fair amount of time, a month or two, when I was on this topic, and asking them, what is joy? How do you define it? How do you see it in your work? And then finally, do you have it? And defining joy was tricky. Identifying it in patients was easy. And then expressing the joy they had in their own lives was largely no. or I wish I had more of it. It was really, really interesting. So, but if we have hope, I believe we can have joy. If you don't have hope, joy doesn't just automatically follow. There's one that necessitates the other. Yeah.
I've never thought about it in that way. That makes a lot of sense.
And the other thing is, and I had this incorrect vision until all of this, that hope was just something you turned on. If you had the right beliefs, it was just like a switch. It was binary, on, off. That's it. Well, I believe in hopeful things. I believe that the Lord is hope and the fruit of the Spirit is joy. So clearly I'm going to have these things. What I have found in my own life, and particularly in the last number of years, is that hope is a living thing. It needs to be fed, and it needs to be nurtured. And it is possible to quote unquote believe the right things and have hope wane. It is possible to believe the right things and not feel joy on a daily basis or even a weekly basis, or I'm going to get real honest, even on a monthly basis. It's possible. The question is, what do we do when we're there? You know, I had a moment yesterday. This is really apt that we're talking today. I'm currently being treated for some internal cancer that came about in July, some skin cancer that metastasized and got underneath the skin, and it makes it trickier. And it formed a couple of tumors in my right arm, and they were able to cut those out, but then they needed to follow up, and we need to follow up with radiation. So yesterday, I was on a table and getting prepped for radiation that will begin next month. And part of that requires you to lay down, and they form this pillow so that you'll have this exact position for all of your treatments. And they also tattoo you so that you've got these little dots that they'll use for the alignment of the beam and all those things. And as I was laying there, I was so teary, unexpectedly teary, just so sad. I think part of it is it was an office. I've been going to this cancer pavilion all these years, and it was an office I had never seen on the first floor. And so now I have seen an expert and a specialist on every single floor of this place, and that was very exhausting. There are all these people receiving this treatment, life-saving treatment. And while I'm grateful for it, it was exhausting. The sheer number of people that needed it felt really overwhelming to me. And fighting cancer again felt really overwhelming to me. And what I have found when I'm in those places of despair, you might call it, or sadness, or just raw emotion, is to be honest about it. I let myself feel it. And so I believe, number one, when we're in those positions of suffering, we need to sit in it. We don't sit in difficult emotions enough. We live in a culture that has idealized comfort, and that has seeped into sometimes our faith and our teachings that comfort is the highest ideal. And if you're uncomfortable, just get comfortable. If you don't like what you're feeling, well, just pick a verse out of the Bible and feel good about yourself again. Right? No, sit in it. Feel it. And the example that I would use to defend that is, what does Job do in the middle of everything that happens? He has lost his children. He has lost his position. He has lost his wealth. He has lost his influence. He has lost his health. And he sits in the ashes. And that's what he does until his friends come. And good on his friends, because even his wife turned her back on him and says, curse God and die, right? I'd rather be a widow than sit through this with you. But his friends come, and they sit for a whole week together it's a beautiful thing. And it was beautiful until they started talking.
They're silent for 7 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
And they
it.
got it right until they started talking. So there's another lesson right there. But the idea being sit in it. And that's hard. I'm a counselor now and a psychotherapist. And part of the hard work that I do with clients is both asking them and then permitting them to sit in whatever it is, and then doing that with them. We have to sit in it. That's number one. Number two, sit in it until you can articulate it. That could be a night. It could be a day. It could be a week. It could be a month. It could be a year. I don't mean drop everything. Don't drop work or your responsibilities. But until you can articulate it and speak it out loud to yourself, to a close friend, but specifically speak it out loud to the Lord. Again, as a counselor, the power of clients speaking out loud what's going on in their mind and in their heart allows them, it gives them power over it because they get to articulate what it is and get to hear it. And I have seen the change that that produces. And it certainly is for me too, is to speak this out loud. I'm feeling sad. How come? What's going on in my mind? What's going on in my heart?
Real quick pause. I have found journaling to be one of the most important weekly exercises for these same reasons. It's incredible how often, whatever emotion I'm experiencing, there's a thing underneath the thing. In other words, the reason why I'm feeling particularly happy or maybe upset is more often than not something beneath the surface. And journaling can be a way to do the hard work of understanding my own heart and my own mind so that I can lay myself before God in prayer.
And so using my example yesterday, I'm on the table being zoomed in and out of the CAT scan machine to make sure I'd fit in my configuration. I'm talking to myself the whole time. You're feeling sad because this is overwhelming. You're feeling sad because this is another thing. You're feeling sad because you're tired. You're feeling, and that experience of doing that is so helpful. And I go back to the story of Hagar, who's kicked out of Abraham and Sarai's encampment, right? Because she's pregnant with Ishmael. And what does she do? She runs out in the desert to almost a certain death. And the angel comes to her and says, "What are you doing?" And she tells him, "I had a fight with Sarai, my boss, my probably my owner, right? And I can't live with that woman." Essentially, right? I'm adding a couple words there. And it's interesting that the angel not only says, "I see you," but you got to go back to her, and this is what's going to happen. And Hagar's response is, "Now I have seen the one who sees me." What if she had faked it? What if she didn't have the courage to say out loud what it was? I think too often we are reticent because we are unwilling to sit in it long enough to say, "Lord, why is this happening? This makes me feel. And I am being left out of life because my body is not what I want it to be. My career is not what I want it to be. My children aren't what I want them to be. I'm not. Why is that, Lord?" And that gives us the ability then to move into what I think for me has been very helpful is the third step. So it's sit in it, articulate it, and then lastly, discern it. Hold up whatever that is against the Bible and the story of God. And what is this holy? Is this true? Is what you're feeling, is it against or expressing, is it with or against the story of the Bible? And the supreme example of that, of course, is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I have thought about that in a new way in the last number of years, where the Lord God himself in the form of Jesus says outright, "I don't want this. I'm suffering just at the thought of the suffering that's coming. And I don't want to do this. Make this pass from me. Pass this cup from me. I do not want this. But your will be done. I think if we can use that example and if we can articulate what it is to the Lord and then hold it up against the Bible, we can see, with obviously his leading and the Spirit's nurturing, this is holy or it's not. And I need to either accept it and bring it in because it is what the Lord, it's his will, or I need to let go of it. Notice I didn't say if it's positive or negative. It's very likely that you are going to have what you perceive to be negative things that are holy and you have to hold on to. And the converse is also true. The opposite is true. There could be quote unquote positive things that you recognize these are not in line with the Bible and I have to let go of them. If we can do that, I believe we can endure. We can endure the grief that's going to come from losing a job, from losing abilities, from losing things that have meant so much to us. And we need to allow ourselves to grieve, but we can endure with hope and subsequently with joy.
Dirk, I'm thinking of the Psalms. Like everything you just said is modeled so profoundly in the scriptures themselves, specifically in the Psalms. I think of times when the psalmist says, for example, how long, O Lord, right? I mean, this is...
Yes.
And then other times when the psalmist says, why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. One time there's a question that's posed and articulated and brought before God. And there's another time where, like you said, the psalmist sees this and holds it up to the truth and says, hey, soul, this isn't true. What are you doing? And we have those modeled throughout the Bible. And I love hearing you describe what it looks like played out in your own life. The second kind of observation I have from everything you just shared is, I wonder if that's perhaps the only way to experience the depth of the hope and the depth of the joy. If I'm not willing to sit in it or sit in it long enough to articulate it, and I'm too, I don't know, afraid to bring it before God for whatever the fear might be, I'm not going to experience any kind of hope or any kind of, it's almost like I'm living a fake life or a life that's not what I'm actually going through. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it completely makes sense. I think you're right. I think if we are unwilling to sit in it, if we're unwilling to wrestle with it, if we are unwilling to engage in it, I think it cheats us. I know, I get it. I do. I understand why people want to distract themselves away from the reality of their pain. I'll be honest. It's attractive. When I'm in the hospital, I wander. We're encouraged to walk. And so you walk the floor. And on certain floors, sometimes I'm in immunocompromised position, so all our doors are shut. But other floors, the doors are open. And I'll see people watching TV all day. I get it. It makes me sad for them, but I understand it. Because it's easier to be distracted, whether it's television or eating or alcohol or drugs or scrolling or whatever it is. It's easier to be distracted by simple answers and simpler pursuits than it is to engage in this stuff. I have found it meaningful and very difficult to continue to ask the question, why? Knowing that I will not get an answer to that question. Not at least in terms of one that will answer it completely for myself, right? But by asking why, I've been driven back to the stories in the Bible and reappreciating Garden of Gethsemane. It's finding the laments in Psalms that I'm so grateful are included within the book. Like Psalm 88, that does not have a cheery ending whatsoever. I have been drawn also to the in-betweens. The in-betweens of the 400 years between Joseph and Moses, where there's silence about what happens, except that persecution comes. And instead of being landowners, the Hebrews become slaves, and yet people were faithful. How is that possible? There's no record of anything the Lord has done. They're faithful. And Moses' parents know what it is to raise Moses as a Hebrew. That is mirrored in between the end of the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's 400 years. God, there's no record of the workings of the Lord, and the people were faithful from generation to generation to generation, such that Anna and Simeon are waiting for the Messiah at the temple. How? Because their parents taught them, because their parents taught them. I think a lot about those people. Who is it that has lived in the perceived silence of the Lord, but done so faithfully, and done so in a way that the next generation knows who he is, even though you don't feel him now? That to me has been so helpful in the why, because I'm not alone in it. I'm not the only one who's been here. You're not the only, we're not the only ones who have felt this. And yet we can be faithful even though we don't feel it. Yeah, that's pushed me a lot. So by asking the why, I have found myself finding more in the Bible that I thought I knew and taught. I taught Bible as a teacher, and I think I thought I knew a lot about it then. I didn't.
We've spoken about that with other guests, how the beautiful Bible, you see parts of it and its depth, and that it so truly reflects human experience in a way that sometimes, the church signs you drive by that have the cute little rhyme or whatever, the scriptures are far better and far more real than that. And I appreciate hearing you say you actually experience a kinship with the authors of the scriptures and the God who's testified to in the scriptures in these long roads in the silence. Dirk, you talked about kind of pre-cancer, Dirk Hollebeek, and post, the last 6 years, and how that's been a marker in your life, two different periods almost in a sense. When it comes to the question of who is God and where is God, maybe briefly, how would you have described that before? But now in these past 6 years, how has your answer changed, or what is your answer today to who is God and where is God in all of this?
Who is God? God hasn't changed, but my experience of him and with him has. And so I don't necessarily still cling to this almost vision of the Lord simply being on high, and he's looking at us and bestowing blessings or not on us. I believe that he's in the darkness with us. An image that was so helpful to me for a long time is one that I'm coming back to, and that is being in the valley of the shadow of death, and I can't see, and there's no clear path, but there's a hand that is holding my hand, and it's the Lord leading me through. So where is God? Sometimes I've had to ask that question, and I have to confront that question every single time I go to another medical appointment. I feel it. I'll be back tomorrow. And I'll feel it as I park my car in a familiar spot, and I grab my parking ticket, and I go back to the elevator, and I enter the cancer pavilion. Lord, are you here today? And the answer is yes. But I have to find him in that, and then make room for him. That's a problem too. I have to make room for him.
What does that mean, to make room for him?
I mean, I have to, using that process I talked about, where I'm going to sit in it, speak it, and I'm going to discern it. I have to say, Lord, I'm gonna chase away. I'm gonna push out. I'm gonna process through these feelings of just being overwhelmed and allow you to have some space here. Because otherwise I'm so busy thinking about my things that I don't have room for him. And that's been important too. It used to be, you had asked me earlier, like, are there tangible stories of the Lord's visibility in your life? And I can tell you all kinds. I mean, yes, waking up from a procedure and having friends from New Mexico that I didn't know were coming in for Christmas waiting for me. Having visits from people and praying over me that they didn't know that I had a procedure coming, and they show up unsolicited. There's lots of these, and I could tell you all kinds. But there will come a time, if you are sick long enough, where those dwindle and they stop. I believe there's a compassion fatigue that we all feel. And there's grief that comes with that, where the story isn't as compelling anymore, or it's not as immediate. And there's another thing. There's another crisis du jour, because there always is another crisis. And when you are no longer that crisis, or your family is no longer the center of that crisis, you can feel very isolated and alone. And the question then becomes, what do you do with that? Do you let it turn into bitterness? Do you let it turn into negative emotions and feelings and sadness? Or do you recognize it for what it is, and recognize that the reason that you are no longer the crisis du jour is because you have lived long enough? And you can look at it two ways, like, oh, I've been forgotten, which I've felt. Or you can look at it as, but I've had life, and look what I've been able to do with it because I've lived this long. And they're both very, very appropriate, I think, responses, but one is life-giving and one is taking. And sometimes you got to just choose it. It's hard. It's really difficult. The search for God in all of this has led me to those parts of the Bible where I'm not alone in that search. It also has caused me to look deeper. What does it mean to be a Christian when life is a mess? And living into that and not being afraid of that has allowed conversations and relationships and opportunities with my caregivers, with fellow patients, with doctors, with family, with friends, that would not have happened otherwise. And I'm not saying that's the sheer reason why. I stopped looking for the silver lining a long time ago, and that's been very helpful. That to me has been very, very important in this walk, and in being able to see the Lord in it through the pursuit of him, but also the ability to relate to people in a way I never could have before. Is that the reason? No, I don't think that's the reason. Is it a byproduct? Absolutely. I was amazed at what these years have brought out in a faith that was started, and it has caused it to grow in ways I didn't know it needed to. But it also showed me how powerful the upbringing and the pre-cancer years were, because it caused something that was already there to grow deeper. And that's valuable. And that's the value of what we're doing here. I say we. I still say we, even though I haven't been on staff in years. In what's being done here, and in Christian schools, and in Sunday schools, and in our churches, and in our homes. It's not just vital; it's life-giving.
I like that you say we, Dirk. Please keep saying we.
Thank you. Thank you.
You defined hope and joy.
Yeah.
What do they look like in your life today?
Yeah. Having meaning, and maybe this is where I was trying to go the whole time, but finding meaning in life even when it doesn't go the way you want to.
Well, okay. That I think you're touching something really important.
Yeah.
I don't know the person whose life went how they thought it would, whether that's
Right.
their marriage, their
Right.
career. And because it didn't go how it was supposed to, it's kind of devoid of meaning. Or I've even thought before, oh, well, God, this isn't the life God had for me. So I'm just kind of off on this other life. Maybe you've experienced that in your cancer journey.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what does hope and joy and meaning, what does a meaningful look like when it didn't go the way
It's
you
supposed
always
to.
thought it would?
Right,
should?
right. And that's part of what we addressed earlier, and that is, let's admit it. Let's articulate it. Let's grieve it. And then wait a minute. Let's discern it. Was this really up to me all along? Was this really the most important thing? For me, the answer was no. It had to be no. And those are things like continuing on as an educator, being physically able, being healthy, and being able to spend time doing everything I want to without medical interventions. I had hoped for those things, but ultimately I had to rectify that hope up against my reality and either become embittered by that or instead say, this is what I'm called to for now, maybe for the rest of my life. Will we occupy the life that we're in, or will we hope for something else? And we're called to occupy the life we're in. It's not what I had intended. It's not what I thought I was called to. And yet it has been an opportunity to share, I think, something that we don't talk about much in the church, or at least I don't remember hearing much about the church or emulated well. And that is, you can have faith even when you don't have all the answers. You can have faith when it's silence that you're experiencing. You can be one of the generations in that 400 years and still claim the Lord as the Lord of your life even when you feel estranged. We don't talk about that.
Wow.
You can do that, and it's not
Amen.
just because you have the habits. It's because you still believe the Lord will make good of it, because he promises that, even though you're not sure you'll see it. And you're at a place where you truly can say, where else can I go? And there is nowhere else because you've tried. There's no easy answer, and you're still going to say, but the Lord is still Lord. That's currently the life that I believe the Lord has called me to.
Man, Dirk, that is a description or a vision of faith that is both compelling and a little frightening for me to hear. And yet I think you're right. That is what we are all called to walk in some season of our life, but maybe for a prolonged season of our life. That's what faith means. What do you do when you don't hear from God in the way that makes everything better right away, or when the glory story isn't the arc the story arc that we love to hear and share? What does it mean to follow Jesus in the dark?
Yeah, that's a great summary of what we've been talking about. Yeah. It reminds me of the images of the blades of grass. They're not fields of grass on the paths of righteousness. They're blades, tufts, and then scrabble and dust and rock, and then another blade or two of grass. and that is what my experience has been like. There's enough, and then you go a little further, and then there's another. And that's enough. And then there's another. That's the walk of faith in the dark, is seeking out the blades of grass that are the nourishment of joy, the blades of grass of joy, right? That are giving us just enough. And then trusting that there'll be another tuft somewhere.
Dirk, every story is a little different. Every experience of suffering is different. But what might you say to someone listening to this show right now who is experiencing some form of suffering in whatever context that might be?
Yeah.
And just to make it real a minute, we share prayer requests, right, in the staff on Wednesdays before. This is just the high school, so this is a portion of the staff. And I'm always shocked by the things people are going through, the things that people are enduring in their family or personally, and I always think, wow, do the math or the multiplication here. Like in this small group of 40, imagine the 600 students in the high school hallways. Imagine the hundreds of families, thousands of families represented in this place, all the different forms of things that people endure. What has your experience taught you to say for some of those families listening right now?
My answer to that wonderful question is, don't believe the lie that if you are enduring something, if you are suffering, that somehow that means you are at fault. Don't fall into that lie of what I will call the health, and we know is the health and wealth gospel, that you are prosperous because of the Lord, and therefore if you're not, you're outside of the Lord's favor. That's just not true. Period. In the Bible.
Jesus gets angry. It seems like when the Tower of Siloam falls and he says, oh, come on. Or who's to blame for this man's blindness, him or his parents? Count it out.
Right. What are you talking about? You can go into the Old Testament and just look at example after example of the people who are called to follow God, and they didn't necessarily profit by it. Or they weren't excused from suffering. Even Abraham, who did profit greatly in some ways, he suffered over and over and over. That said, my advice is don't believe the lie, and also be open to the Lord. Find a few people. Maybe it's your church, maybe it's family, maybe it's your best friend or two, and let them know. Holding it in does not help anyone.
I think in exposing that lie and articulating that lie, I so often subtly, layers down, maybe in the back of my mind, believe that when the path is difficult, then I must be on the wrong path, or I must have that, and yet the path that I am called to might be hard or might even involve suffering.
Yes.
That for me I'm a daydreamer, Dirk, all the time. Like I've always spent time just like imagining, and I've spent so often like, oh, this is what my life should be or ought to be,
right.
And then I'm just not present in my actual life, right? I'm kind of just
oh man, that's so weird. Nobody else has done that, Brian.
And part of what you're saying in exposing the lie, articulating it, is that nope, right here, where my feet happen to be, is what God is calling me to. So what now? What does it mean for how I'm walking this? God is, oftentimes I've got some family members who are farmers, but sometimes I use this metaphor. I'm like, I'm envisioning some like big 100-acre field to till, and that's going to be my calling and responsibility. And God says, I've given you an acre that you're totally ignoring. Why are you thinking about
your house? It's right in front of your house. It's full of weeds.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, quit imagining this big field.
Knock it off. Focus. I'm going to tell a story, and this is a bit of a preview. I have a support page that I have had the opportunity to do some writing on and expose, and folks are gracious, and I'll make it short. In July, I was sitting in the oncology office again to see an oncologist, and I had tumors, and I've alluded to them before, one under my armpit area and then one right above my elbow. And they were unique in that they were palpable. I mean, they were growing every day and they were visible, and it was very concerning. And we got to the doctor's office, and we were greeted after we checked in with, and the doctor's running 45 minutes behind. And I just about lost my mind because it had been so stressful getting there, and I wanted an answer, and I wanted a prognosis, and I wanted a treatment plan. And those 45 minutes, I was tapping my foot. I was breathing. I couldn't sit still. And Stacy said to me, "Can I read you a devotional?" And I said, sure, which is not like me. It's just not. And so she did. And the gist of that devotional was, as Christians, we are called into the darkness to be the light. So go out and go into the darkness of the world not waiting for the light to show up and being a mirror, not looking for the light so that you can point to it. No, go into the darkness and be the light. And that imagery and that thought allowed me to recognize that the darkness that I was feeling in that oncology waiting room might be exactly where I was called to be. Not to be because this is a great place to be or this was the original plan for my life way back when, but because the disease it was now, and now I could choose to be light here.
Man.
Not hand out pamphlets, right? I'm not that guy. Not stand up and preach, but rather in the manner in which I walk through that office, in the manner in which I have my blood drawn, in the manner in which I greet everybody I come in contact with, I can share the light that I know, and that's the Lord God Almighty. That shift in thinking allowed me not only to endure, but to live in that corner of darkness of my life. And it has allowed me to continue even when the darkness is right there. And just because I know that the Lord is light and that I'm called to be light, it doesn't mean the darkness is magically going to go away in every sphere of my life. It does, though, guarantee me that I know who and what the light is, and I can be that. And now I got to choose. Am I going to be that light? Yes. Yes, I am.
Quick pause. Dirk's words here made me think of an image from the book of Revelation. Right at the beginning, the churches are described as lampstands. One of the jobs of these Christian communities, and I think it applies to individuals as well, is to bear the light of Christ. What a cool picture to get at that calling. That story has such a significance, I like it. The word glory in Hebrew also can mean heavy or weighty. And I think what you just described is that that's a significant, that weighs a lot. What you just said, especially knowing the road that you've been walking. I do love how the synoptic gospel authors, there seems to be a parallel between the transfiguration, which the three of them do recount, where Jesus is lifted up on this mountain, he's glorified, and everyone's saying, can we stick around you? Yes. And then just a few days later, he's lifted up, and it's ugly, and it's shameful. He's almost naked, and everyone's running away from him. Yeah. And it's almost as though the gospel authors are getting us to think about, what is glory? Which one of these is glory?
Yes.
And perhaps not that the transfiguration isn't glory, but there's another kind of glory revealed in who God is when you look to the cross.
And I like the idea, and I think this is a fair summary, that pain and suffering doesn't take away from our promises that have been made or from the beauty of the life that we've been called to. So let's live it where we are. In all aspects of our life, in the darkness and the light, we need to live it.
Dirk Hollebeek, thank you so much, my friend. I'm grateful for the witness and the light that your life is, and thankful for your friendship. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing this conversation to happen, Bryant, and I appreciate it. Thank you.